Yes. I don't know, can you see me or not? However, I'm here. My name is Darius Young, and I am employed by the BARHI, which stands for Bay Area Regional Health and Equity Initiative. Um, however, I'm not here today not only represent my organization, but I'm representing myself and every other African American man and woman who has ever been incarcerated. I spent more than 17 years incarcerated in the California state prison system. And upon getting released in 2012, I began working in advocacy. I started off with the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, where I worked intently on criminal justice reform, not only in Alameda County, but both at the state and federal levels. I then transitioned to another Bay Area organization called the Urban Strategies Council, which was set up by Angela Glover Blackwell. And I was the facilitator of the Alameda County Boards of Men of Color table. I also worked for the campaign, the National Campaign for Black Male Achievement. And while at the Urban Strategies Council, we won the My Brother's Keepers Award. And so those are all the things that I have did that has led me here. And I'll touch more on my background at the end. So what I do want to say is this. I was supposed to be testifying under the school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration, but I'm got placed in this group. So therefore, I'm not going to go over a lot of things that have already been presented, but I will touch on them. So what we do know is that when you talk about mass incarceration, and mass incarceration was actually developed under the 13th Amendment, and I think people have already heard that. And from the 13th Amendment, it states that citizens cannot be enslaved unless convicted of a crime. Intentionally targeted new emancipated Black people as a means of surveilling them and exploiting their labor. In 1865 through 1866, Confederate states, they quickly enacted a new set of laws known as Black Codes. However, I want to point out this because it's relevant. Northern states also turned to the criminal justice system to exert social control over free Black Americans. Policymakers in the North, while they did not legally target Black Americans as explicitly as did their Southern counterparts, they did, have various laws against suspicious characters, disorderly conduct, keeping and visiting disorderly houses, drunkenness, violations of city ordinances, and that made possible new forms of everyday surveillance and punishment in the lives of Black people. And I think Alameda County Public Defender Brendan Woods, who has been instrumental in mentoring me, touched on that well. Next slide. You can go one more. So I just want to point out some statistics that's already been pointed out, but for us, we know that Black men comprise 13% of the U.S. male population, but nearly 35% of all men who are under state or federal jurisdiction with a sentence of more than 1 year. 1 in 3 Black men born in 2001 can expect to be incarcerated in his lifetime, compared to 1 in 6 Latino men and 1 in 17 white men. Black people are incarcerated in state prisons at a rate of 5.1 times greater than all of white people. Next slide. And we know it's not just confined to Black men. We know that 1 in 18 Black women born in 2001 will be incarcerated sometime in her lifetime, compared to 1 in 45 Latinx women and 1 in 111 white women. We know that 4% of incarcerated women are Black, although Black women make up 13% of the female population. So where does this all begin? Next slide. Where does it all begin? Well, it starts with the school to prison pipeline, which refers to practices and policies that disproportionately place students of color into the criminal justice system. What are some of these practices? Zero tolerance policies. The effect of zero tolerance policies. The fact is that 2.7 million K through 12 students received one or more out of school suspensions during 2015 and 16 school year. Next slide. So one of the things that we do know is out of school suspensions disproportionately impacted Black African American students. We know that only 8% of male students are Black African American, but these students represent 25% of out of school suspensions. We also know that only 8% of female students were Black or African American, but these students represented 14% of out of school suspensions. And so we also know that in comparison, white students received out of school suspensions at a rate lower than their involvement. And so what we are looking at is these disproportionate based upon the color of people's skin. Next slide. So we also know that 290,600 students were referred to law enforcement agencies were arrested during 2015 school year, and only 15% of students were Black or African American, but these students represented 31% of law enforcement referrals and arrests. 49% of students were white, but these students represented only 36% of law enforcement referrals. And for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward on my slides. Next slide. So what do we know? Students who fail to complete high school are more likely to be in prison. And this is something right here that everyone needs to pay attention to. Among men born between 1975 and 1979, an African American high school dropout, that's nearly they have nearly 70% of a chance of being in prison by their mid 30s, and that's really high. But what we also need to know is this, that in California, right, the number is 90%. 90% of African American males who do not complete high school or drop out, and it's mostly caused by these policies and practices that have happened behind the school to prison pipeline. They have a 90% chance of ending up in incarceration. The other fact that we need to know is this: 21% of African Americans with a high school diploma or GED will also go to prison in their lifetime. I myself fall into that category. Next slide. So what needs to be stated in this is that Black women, they do bear the burden of mass incarceration. And it was a gentleman by the name of Arnold Chandler who created the Life Course framework for improving the lives of boys and men of color. It was pointed out that according to a survey in 2018 conducted by NORC at the University of Chicago that looked at what percentages of African Americans have ever had a family member incarcerated, it was found that 40% of African American women surveyed said that they currently have a family member incarcerated. The rate for Black men was only 32%. The rate for white women was 12%, and the rate for white men was 6%. And so what we're seeing is that African American women are touched by incarceration more than any other group in American society. And I want to point out something else. I put here 1.5 million missing Black men. Now, this was conducted in a study by the New York Times, and it came out in 2012. And what that study looked at was a specific age group called the prime working age, which is 25 to 54. That study asked a very simple question: how many Black men are either dead or incarcerated for every 100 Black women between the ages of 25 and 54 for the country as a whole. What they found was very extraordinary is that only 83 black men who are not dead or incarcerated between the ages of 25 and 54 for every 100 women. Once again, they found 83 black men who are not dead or incarcerated between the ages of 25 and 54 for 100 women. So naturally, there are 17 missing black men for every 100 black women. When they look further at places like Ferguson, Missouri, for example, the ratio was 60 to 100. And so that equaled out to there are about 40 missing black men for every 100 women between the ages of 25 and 54. Now, one of the things that I pointed out, Mr. Arnold Chandler, who developed this life course framework for improving the lives of boys and men of color, he did his own study. And he crunched the numbers for certain neighborhoods in the Bay Area, such as East Oakland, West Oakland, Visitation Point in San Francisco, and also Hunters Point. And what he found was that the ratio in those neighborhoods is 50 black men to 100 black women that are missing. And he found there are only 50 black men between the ages of 25 to 54 for every 100 black men. So putting this all into perspective, and I think this is important, and it's important to the, having strong, vibrant, and healthy neighborhoods. It's literally impossible to have two-parent families when you look at those numbers. And then the effect of incarceration, we know that it lies within the school systems. And let me say that the school systems today, even though we sought to correct some of the things, they're still using measures that really, really harm our children. And I can point to a local school this month that brought the National Guard or some form of military on campus to search their students. And that was, unacceptable. So even though we have made great strides or tried to limit the impact of mass incarceration through our schools, the school to prison pipeline, they are still sending reinforcing messages that we need to be corralled when they see us. So I want to talk a little bit about my testimony. As I said, I'm falling into one of those that did graduate from high school. As a matter of fact, I went on to college. I spent 2 years in community college and then went to Washington State University where I spent 2 years. But I came home. And at that time, I was interested in going into law enforcement. In 1985, I was hired by the Richmond, California Police Department. And I was hired because Richmond at that time, they had a string of shootings and they were doing things that were comparable today. They got sued and they were under a consent decree and they had to hire more minorities. Well, I was one of the first classes that got hired under that. I went to the police academy at Los Medanos College, 40 recruit class, and I was the vice president of my academy class. Upon graduation, I started field training. I was in field training for 6 weeks before I was brought up on unfounded charges by my field training officer, who just happened to be a part of the Richmond Cowboys, the group that the police department was sued for. And I had no IA investigation or anything like that. I was terminated, but not for anything that I did wrong. It was just that they said I didn't have what it takes to be a police officer, even though I had weeks of field training left to prove that. My life took me up north to Seattle, Washington. And at that time, I was 25 years old. I walked into the federal government's building and I looked at employment, what was on the wall. And what appealed to me was, wow, Forest Ranger, I can do this. I have a degree in criminal justice. I graduated from the police academy. I grew up in the outdoors. I was exposed to the outdoors. And I said, I would love to do this. I went over to the forestry building to apply for the job. And when I walked in, it was a white man. He looked at me and he says, "May I help you?" I says, "Yes, I'm here to apply for the Forest Ranger's position." And he looked at me and says, "Well, I don't know if you qualify." "Oh, I do meet the requirements. It says that you have to have an AA degree and have graduated from a post-approved academy. At that time, I carried around my diplomas with me in my knapsack. I pulled them out, and he looked at me, and he says, assuming I don't know what these things are, but we'll check them out. And that hit me because to him, they weren't diplomas, they weren't degrees, they were things. And at that point in my life, I started thinking of myself as a thing. I was eventually convicted of a three strikes crime in 1995 in Alameda County. I was sentenced to 36 years to life by a Alameda County judge, African-American man by the name of Carl Morris. And then 120 days later, he recalled my sentence with the blessings of the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. And he said, you know, Mr. Young, I believe that you can correct your life, so I'm going to strike a prior. You're going to spend a long time in prison, but you will get out. And on that sentence, I spent 17 years, 4 days, 2 hours, and 20 minutes. And I paroled in 2012. And from that point in time, I haven't looked back. But I say all this to say that, you know, people end up in the system. Fortunately, I was able to rebound because I was still raised in a community. I was raised in neighborhoods. But unfortunately, our kids today, we aren't raised in neighborhoods. We're only raised in hoods. And those things have been destroyed and dismantled by the war on drugs, dumping guns, crack cocaine, and everything else imaginable to destroy Black boys, Black girls, so that they can't become productive citizens in society. And I would say that the only way to overturn all of this, to help this, because it goes back from the beginning, from Black codes when we were left out, locked out, our ancestors, that we must have reparations. We must have reparations to correct the wrongs and start the healing process that is so necessary for us as Black people and the country as a whole, if we're ever going to get and live up to our values. So I do thank you, and I thank you for allowing me to give this testimony. Thank you very much.